On a lonely, snow-covered ridge in the Plumas National Forest, police officers stood looking at a vehicle that shouldn't have been there. It was a turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego. It was parked on a rugged, unpaved service road miles away from civilization, deep in the Californian wilderness. The car was not crashed. The engine was in working order. The gas tank was a quarter full. The keys were gone, but the car was unlocked. Inside, there were candy wrappers and basketball programs. But the 5 men who had been in that car, they were gone. They had stepped out of a perfectly warm vehicle and walked into the darkness of a blizzard, dressed only in light jackets and sneakers. They vanished into the freezing night, leaving behind clues that would eventually lead to one of the most disturbing discoveries in FBI history. What search teams would find months later in a trailer miles up the mountain would defy all logic, contradict human survival instincts, and leave investigators with a single, haunting question that remains unanswered nearly 50 years later. What terrified these men so much that they chose to die in the cold rather than go back to their car? This is the story of the Yuba County Five. To understand the tragedy that unfolded on the night of February 24, 1978, we first have to understand who these 5 men were. In the media, they were often referred to as boys, though their ages ranged from 24 to 32. They were a tight-knit group of friends from Yuba City and Marysville, California. They were uniquely vulnerable, but they were also beloved, functioning members of their community who lived with their parents and held steady jobs. First was 32-year-old Ted Wire. Ted was a friendly, gentle giant, known for his warm heart and his habit of waving at strangers. Next was 29-year-old Jack Madruga, a mesmerizingly quiet Army veteran who loved his car, that turquoise Mercury Montego, more than anything. There was 30-year-old Bill Sterling, a deeply religious man who spent his time reading literature to patients in mental hospitals. Then there was 24-year-old Jack Hewitt, the youngest of the group, who was devoted to his friends. And finally, there was 25-year-old Gary Mathias. Gary was the outlier. He was an Army veteran who had struggled with drug abuse and schizophrenia in the past, leading to a psychiatric discharge from the military. However, by 1978, Gary was doing well. He was taking his medication, working in his stepfather's gardening business, and had become a leader among the group. Together, they played on a basketball team called the Gateway Gators, a program for the mentally handicapped. They were more than just teammates. They were best friends. And on Saturday, February 25th, they were scheduled to play the biggest game of their lives. A tournament winner could get them a week-long trip to Los Angeles. They had their uniforms laid out. They were ecstatic. The night before the big tournament, Friday, February 24th, the 5 friends piled into Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego. They were heading to Chico, California, about 50 miles north, to watch a college basketball game between UC Davis and Chico State. They wanted to study the moves of the college players to prepare for their own game the next day. The evening began perfectly. They arrived in Chico, watched the game, and cheered as UC Davis won. Witnesses confirmed the men were in high spirits. After the game ended around 10 p.m., they did what any group of friends would do on a Friday night road trip. They stopped for snacks. They pulled into Bear's Market in downtown Chico. The clerk remembered them vividly because they bought a large haul of junk food: Hostess cherry pies, Langendorf lemon pies, Snickers bars, instructions, and sodas. It was a celebration. They walked out of that store around 10 p.m. The drive from Chico back to Yuba City is a straight shot south down Highway 99. It is a simple, flat 50-minute drive. They should have been home by midnight. Their parents were waiting for them. But midnight came and went. Then 1 a.m. Then dawn. The beds remained empty. The uniforms for the next day's tournament lay untouched on their dressers. By the morning of February 25th, the families knew something was terribly wrong. These were men of routine. Jack Madruga, the driver, was exceptionally responsible. He never let anyone drive his beloved car, and he never deviated from a plan. The families called the police, and a massive search began. The route between Chico and Yuba City was combed, but there was no sign of the Mercury Montego. It was as if the car had dissolved into the air. For 4 days, there was nothing. No sightings, no phone calls, no wreckage. Then, on February 28th, a forest ranger made a call that changed everything. He had spotted the vehicle, but the location made no sense. The car was found on a rocky, snow-packed service road in the Plumas National Forest, roughly 70 miles northeast of Chico. This was not on the way home. In fact, it was in the completely opposite direction. To get there, Jack Madruga had to have driven past the turnoff for Yuba City, continued east into the mountains, and climbed to an elevation of 4,400 feet. The road was treacherous, full of potholes and bumps. For a man like Madruga, who treated his car like a jewel, driving on this road was unthinkable.
When police reached the car, the mystery deepened. The Mercury Montego was stuck in a snowdrift, but barely. The tires had spun, but the car wasn't bogged down. 5 healthy men could have easily pushed it free. The gas tank was a quarter full. The engine started immediately when police hotwired it. There were no dents, no scratches on the undercarriage, which was impossible given the rough terrain they had just driven over, unless the driver had navigated it with extreme, almost supernatural caution in the dark. Inside the car, the wrappers from the snacks bought at Bear's Market were present, but the candy bars and pies themselves were gone. The car was unlocked. One window was rolled down, letting in the freezing mountain air, but the men were nowhere to be found. The police were baffled. Why drive up a mountain in the middle of the night? Why abandon a working car? And why walk into a blizzard without winter clothing? A witness soon came forward with a story that added a layer of terror to the investigation. A local man named Joseph Shans had been driving up that same mountain road on the night of February 24th to check the snow levels at his cabin. His car had gotten stuck in the snow. While trying to push it out, Shans suffered a mild heart attack. He sat inside his car, in pain, with the engine running to keep warm. Shans told police that later that night he saw headlights approaching from behind. A car pulled up behind him and stopped. He saw a group of people, and thinking he was being rescued, he called out for help. But the moment he yelled, the lights went dark. The people went silent. Hours later, Shans said he saw flashlights outside. He called for help again. The lights immediately vanished. Then he claimed to see a pickup truck pull up. He saw a person get out and shine a flashlight into the Mercury Montego. Shans called out a third time. The person didn't respond, got back in the truck, and drove away. Shans later admitted he was in extreme pain and arguably delirious, but he was adamant that he saw a woman with a baby in the shadows, a detail investigators dismissed as a hallucination. However, he insisted that the men in the Montego were there, and they seemed to be hiding from something, or someone. Days turned into weeks. A massive blizzard hit the Sierra Nevada mountains the day after the car was found, dropping feet of snow and making search efforts impossible. The parents of the Yuba County Five waited in agony. Winter dragged on. It wasn't until the summer thaw, months later in June, that the forest finally gave up its secrets, and the truth was far worse than anyone had imagined. On June 4, 1978, a group of motorcyclists riding through the forest stumbled upon a windowless Forest Service trailer at a campground called Rogers Cow Camp. This trailer was approximately 19 miles deeper into the wilderness from where the car had been found. Inside the trailer, they found the body of Ted Wire. The scene inside the trailer is what led investigators to call this the American Dyatlov Pass. Ted was found lying on a bed wrapped in 8 sheets from head to toe. He had been dead for quite some time, but the autopsy revealed something horrifying. Ted Wire had not frozen to death quickly. He had lived for weeks, perhaps as long as 3 months inside that trailer. He had grown a beard. He had lost nearly 100 pounds, going from a robust 200 pounds to a skeletal 100 pounds. His feet were badly frostbitten. But here is the part that haunts detectives to this day. Ted Wire starved to death in a cabin full of food. The trailer was a storage base for forest rangers. Outside, there was a propane tank filled with gas that could have heated the trailer and kept it warm. The valve had not been opened. Inside, there was a fireplace and matches. They were untouched. In a storage shed just a few steps outside the trailer, there were military-grade C rations, enough food to feed all 5 men for a year. Many of the cans had been opened and eaten, but dozens remained. Ted had apparently laid in that bed, slowly starving and freezing, while the means to survive were within arm's reach. Why didn't he turn on the gas? Why didn't he start a fire? Why did he stop eating? Investigators found Ted's leather shoes absent. His feet were wrapped in improvised cloth. On the table by the bed, they found a gold watch, a lighter, and a wallet. They belonged to the other men. As the snow continued to melt, the search teams fanned out, and the rest of the grim picture began to form. 11 miles from the trailer, the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were found. They were not together, but close. It appeared they had perished on the walk from the car to the trailer. Madruga had been partially consumed by wildlife. He was identified by the thumb of his right hand. Bill Sterling was found nearby, reduced to bones scattered in a wooded area.
2 days later, Jack Hewitt's father, who had joined the search teams, found his own son's backbone under a manzanita bush 2 miles northeast of the trailer. He identified his son by his Levi jeans and his shoes. That left only one man unaccounted for, Gary Mathias. Gary Mathias's tennis shoes were found inside the trailer. This suggested that Gary had made it to the trailer with Ted. It was likely Gary who had opened the C rations using a military P-38 can opener, a skill he would have learned in the Army. Ted and Jack Hewitt likely wouldn't have known how to use it. This meant Gary was alive for a time in that cabin. But Gary Mathias was never found. His body remains missing to this day. Did he try to walk out for help after Ted died? Did he suffer a psychotic break due to the lack of medication and wander into the deep wilderness? Or did he slip away to start a new life? The latter seems impossible given the harsh conditions and his lack of shoes. Gary simply vanished. The evidence left behind paints a picture of absolute confusion and terror. We know that after abandoning the car, the men walked 19 miles uphill in deep snow, in pitch darkness, wearing only basketball sneakers and light jackets. This is a physical feat that even trained athletes would struggle to accomplish. So the question remains, why? There are several theories, but none fully explain the strangeness of the case. The first theory is the wrong turn. Some believe that while driving back to Yuba City, Madruga missed the exit. Flustered and panicking, he drove north towards the mountains. But this doesn't explain why he drove 70 miles in the wrong direction on a road that became increasingly rugged. Jack Madruga was a careful driver who knew the area. The second theory is the Gary Mathias episode. Gary had schizophrenia. If he had an episode in the car, could he have frightened the others? Did he force them to drive into the mountains? But Gary's family insisted his condition was managed. And if Gary was the aggressor, why did the men stay together? Why did they walk 19 miles together in the snow? The third theory, and perhaps the most chilling, involves the bully. Some investigators speculate that the men had a run-in with someone at the basketball game or at the convenience store. Were they chased? Did someone follow them up that mountain road? This aligns with Joseph Shones's testimony of seeing the lights go out and the men hiding. If they were terrified that someone was hunting them, they might have abandoned the car to hide in the woods, waiting for the threat to leave. In their fear, they walked too far, got lost, and ended up at the trailer. But even this theory fails to explain the trailer. Why starve when there is food? Why freeze when there is heat? Psychologists have suggested a phenomenon called learned helplessness. The men, specifically Ted, Bill, and the 2 Jacks, were accustomed to being cared for. They lived structured lives where decisions were made by parents. In a high-stress survival situation, they may have been waiting for permission to eat the food or turn on the gas. They may have been waiting for someone to save them. Gary Mathias, who had military training, was likely the one keeping them alive, opening the cans and organizing them. But if Gary's medication ran out, or if he tried to leave to get help, the others would have been left helpless.
When Ted Weher was found, he was wearing Gary Mathias's shoes. They were too big for him. This implies that at some point, Gary's feet swelled or he left the trailer and Ted put them on. To this day, the disappearance of the Yuba County Five remains a dark stain on American history. It is a story of 5 friends who went out for a night of joy and ended up in a nightmare of endurance and tragedy. The car parked neatly, the walk into the snow, the starvation amidst plenty. It contradicts the survival instinct ingrained in every human being. What did they see in the darkness that night? What drove them up that mountain? And where is Gary Mathias? We may never know the full truth. The forest keeps its secrets well. But as long as the question remains, the story of the Yuba County Five will continue to terrify and fascinate us. It is a reminder that sometimes the most frightening mysteries aren't about ghosts or monsters, but about the inexplicable decisions of the human mind. If you want to dive deeper into the hidden files of American history and uncover the truths that have been buried for decades, make sure you hit that subscribe button for American Mystery Vault. We are just getting started, and the next mystery is waiting for you.